Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Luca. I'm a team member at the Alchemist Kitchen, and today I'm with Jennifer Cardilla, who will be teaching a class with us coming up called Writing to Heal. So we're going to be talking a little bit about her background, getting to know her. Jennifer, when did you first feel a calling to write?
Well, hi, Luca. It's really nice to be here, and I'm very excited for the upcoming workshop. And my calling to write actually started, probably from the first time I picked up a pencil. I remember being very excited by any kind of writing projects when I was young. I actually even pulled out, I'm here at my childhood home, and I found this lovely, my one of my first books, which is a lovely piece of construction paper, bound. And this is volume two, apparently, of these poems. I remember being very excited by this. We had these toys, which many of you probably know, Beanie Babies, that came with these little like 4-line poems to describe their characters. And I rewrote all of them. So I wrote new poems to go with all of my toys and took it very seriously, obviously, to have these little books published. And I remember rewriting a lot of different other stories that I wrote, that I read. Matilda was a favorite of mine, and a lot of those sort of classic childhood stories that I would scribble away in my marble notebooks and make my own. And so it's really been a lifelong calling. It has transformed over the course of my life as I've worked in publishing, which is my first career, and now I have transitioned to be an author myself. So it's been with me for as long as I can remember. Oh, you muted.
You are an Ayurvedic health coach. So when did your journey with Ayurveda start?
Yeah, so Ayurveda was it's interesting because I found yoga and Ayurveda almost in a way as a counter to my work in publishing. I started as an editor right out of college, and had studied literature throughout all of my high school and college years. And then in that process, really sort of forgot about my body, and had many other sort of misinformations about what it means to be healthy, and really just prioritized my mind so much. And yoga was one of the ways that I really started to connect back to my body and a healthy relationship with my body. And Ayurveda came along with it. It was part of my studies in yoga teacher training. And then I sought Ayurvedic counseling for my own health. And that was also really transformative and helped me identify a lot of different areas of lack of nutrition in my life, not only with food, but also with my relationships and my work. And it was actually through Ayurveda, I'll never forget this. My first practitioner on our very first session was really asking me a lot about my job and like whether I was satisfied with my job working in publishing in New York City. And I was like, what does this have to do with it? Like, why aren't we talking about what I'm eating? And she sort of planted the seed, like, well, maybe some of that component of your lifestyle is not really supportive to your overall health. And I just sort of like dismissed it at the time because I was like, I can't handle that. But then once I actually started feeling better in my body, I had the resilience and the energy to think about those bigger questions, which can be really hard to grapple with when you don't feel well physically. And so once all of that sort of fell into place, I actually got up the courage to leave my job and pursue yoga and freelance work, and then eventually Ayurveda as a result. And so she was one of the first people I told, actually, when I quit that first job, because I was like, I did it. Like, you were right. This was this sort of thing that was contributing to a lot of distress in me. And of course, it's different for everybody, but making that connection between yoga and Ayurveda and these mindfulness practices really was able to help me further my path of personal healing, but then also to discover these modalities as a way to really help others. And what I like to talk about now is how I still am doing a lot of work with stories and editing in a lot of ways, because when we look at the story of our health, the story of how perhaps we've gotten to a state of imbalance or to a state of a disease, what were the factors leading up to that? What were the characters? What were the plot twists that sort of got us off track and lost our sense of stability and health internally? So it's really very much still a sort of writing and editing process, even when we talk about health.
And speaking of writing process, we came to know you, the Alchemist Kitchen came to know you through your work with Root and Nourish. We did an amazing 4-week, 6-week book club with you. Yeah. So I wanted to hear about your process writing the cookbook.
Yeah, writing Root and Nourish was such a trip for me because, as I've been mentioning, I worked in publishing for a long time and sort of saw how books were made and loved that process, but thought like, I'm not going to put myself through that. It's very, very arduous, very long term, a lot of back and forths, and a lot of sort of your own personal self, comes through the page, no matter what you're writing. If you're writing a novel or memoir or a cookbook, anything is sort of a deep investment of your time, your energy, and yourself. And so coming to it was actually a number of wonderful things allowed me to come to this place to be able to write a book. But while I was writing it, it really came back to supporting my own daily routines that I had learned and was so grateful for to have from Ayurveda. My co-author and I, Abby Rodriguez, we started writing at the end of 2019. And then, of course, we all know what happened a couple of months later. And so a lot of the creation was done during the pandemic and the early days of the pandemic when things were especially crazy. And also the other confounding factor was that at the beginning, there was a lot of that fear about food. There were all those like intense grocery runs. And so we faced this sort of like shortage of the ingredients that we were looking for, or lack of access. And one of the big components of writing a cookbook is actually getting people to test your recipes, people who are not you, to be able to cook the recipes and see if they work, if they not only enjoy them, but are, the instructions clear, are the measurements accurate, did you make a mistake somewhere? And people were really struggling to not only get the food that they needed for their day-to-day lives, but because our book is sort of specialized in herbalism and Ayurveda, there are some sort of specialty ingredients that people didn't have access to. So it was a real challenge. And confronting all of those challenges on top of a pandemic, and making sure I was nourished myself to deal with all of that, as well as this creative process that I was engaging in, was really, really important. And so thankfully, I was cooking all of these meals that are very healthy and nutritious. And so I had a leg up on that front, that I had a lot of food at my disposal that could fuel my brain and fuel my body as I was going through, but really prioritizing sleep, prioritizing exercise, and making this a part of my life rather than sort of shutting out entire other portions of it. I had to find a balance of, what are my days when I'm cooking? What are my days when I'm writing? How am I sort of balancing all of that so that I don't have an excess of leftover food that I'm overwhelmed by, or leave everything to the end and then feel overwhelmed by all the writing. So it was a little bit of a balancing act, but my tools from Ayurveda were especially helpful in helping us get through it.
I really love how the Root and Nourish book club with Alchemist Kitchen was a whole body experience. And the class that you'll be teaching, Right to Heal, you described the correlation between digesting your thoughts and digesting food. So can you talk a little bit about that, what that means to you?
Yes, this is one of my favorite things to talk about with regards to a writing practice, which is what we'll be focusing on in the class, but also in our day-to-day life, because whether or not you consider yourself a creative person, quote unquote, if you're engaged in a writing practice for your work, or for an artistic purpose, or sort of self-care or mental health, or other kinds of art, painting, pottery, sculpture, all sorts of creation that we can be undergoing, is that there's a direct correlation between how we experience that in a more sort of aesthetic or mental or emotional level, but also what's going on in our body. When we look at the 5 elements that we're comprised of as people, and all beings in the world are comprised of these 5 elements according to Ayurveda: space, air, fire, water, and earth. If you look at that hierarchy of elements and we sort of look at them in that order, space and air, which are sort of our more mental faculties, this sort of light, intangible, mobile ideas that we have, that can be translated then into physical art, whether it's words on the page or other sorts of creations. All of that sort of like the mental part, right? And then the physical part, the water and the earth, is how we feel our physical body, how we feel food, which, speaking of creation, not only was Root and Nourish a creation of a book of words, of things on the page, but we were creating food. We were creating this sort of nourishment that became a creative act in and of itself. It was very like meta in that way. But these sort of bottom elements, the water and the earth, which we experience in these tangible forms in our physical body, but also in the things that we make, the products, what's in between those? Fire. Fire is our digestive capacity that transforms whether something that we're eating or something that we're thinking up. It transforms it from just a thought into something that you can make, something you could feel, whether it's a book or a meal or a painting or some other thing. Fire is what transforms that. And we could see this correlating into all the different realms of our life, whether it's this sort of these more explicit creative pursuits, but also into, I have a thought or a feeling, and how does it translate into my actions with my partner or with people that are in my life? How is it transforming into my movement capacities? How is it transforming into how I feel in my body? There are all of these sorts of transformation processes that are happening. And so when we engage with an act like writing, it can be that kind of conduit, that transformative action that helps to bring something that's mental, something that's air and space elements, into something that's physical, something that we can sort of embody. And we'll talk in the workshop too about how movement practices, very simple things, you don't have to be a yogi or an athlete in any way to move your body, and to help for that flow, help for that access of the energy to move through you. We talk a lot about in Ayurveda and yoga, this idea of prana, which is our life force. And prana is the thing that we want to keep moving smoothly and regularly through our mind and through our body. There's this very direct correlation between the two. And when that's moving regularly, we have health in all aspects of our life. We have mental health, physical health, and everything in between. And so accessing prana and having a strong digestive fire to help transform our ideas into something physical, something we can make, is going to not only help that artistic process, but also help keep us physically in shape in order to do that. How many of us, even if we're not pursuing something creative, but just doing our day-to-day work, writing emails, writing text messages, trying to communicate with other people, when we're depleted, when we're tired or exhausted, or we don't have good nutrition, that can be really challenging. And either you just don't have the energy to communicate, or you communicate maybe in not your best light, you misspeak, or you react really sharply. I know I do that all the time, where it's like you're tired and you haven't access the nutrition that your body needs from your food or from whatever source, and you sort of have these snap reactions or these instantaneous responses that you haven't thought through because you're exhausted. And so not only will it help us improve our day-to-day communications and be more present for everything that we're trying to transform and interpret, but when we are engaging in these more artistic pursuits, this more creative part of our lives, we could also show up more fully and be more stable in that process.
Speaking of creative parts of our lives, do you have any creativity practices or writing rituals right now that you're doing?
Yes. So my writing practice personally has undergone a lot of changes over the course of my life. Currently, I'm really loving this sort of morning pages, quote unquote. Morning pages is a very classic form of journaling that was made popular by wonderful teacher, Julia Cameron. And this is just sort of a morning journaling practice. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I usually couple it with my meditation and pranayama breath work practice in the morning. So I do a little bit of that when I get up. I sort of center myself, and then I just set a timer for 15 minutes and write whatever comes up. Sometimes it's about my dreams that I had during sleep. Sometimes it's about other things that are on my mind, some things that are coming up during the day. I don't really put a lot of boundaries or restrictions on that. If I'm looking to sort of actively work with something that I'm dealing with, sometimes I like to write a lot of questions and not trying to find anything. It's very much a sort of digestive process in and of itself that way. It's churning through those, chewing through those thoughts that are in my head. And even if I don't come to a resolution or an answer, that practice really sort of gets the fire going. It gets that capacity internally going, so that I'm not working so hard and explicitly using my mind to solve those problems or engage with those issues or inquiries that I'm working with, but it's going on in the background. And then as I continue to nourish myself during the day, I can find more easily the supports that I need to deal with the insights or make the space that I need to listen and hear the information that I need during the day to achieve my goals, or to just get through whatever I'm working on, whether it's a project or an artistic project, or something more personal. So it's sort of a multifaceted, and it's a container for this flow, which is something else that we're going to be talking a lot about in the workshop, of how to build practices around writing. If you're new to writing or looking to use writing in a different way than you currently are, how to build a container around it so that the creative flow of it, which in Ayurveda we might associate with the Vata dosha, that space and air elements, how can Vata move through us in a way that feels safe and not overwhelming, because a lot of times when we write, we come up against difficult emotions, or if there's trauma involved, and that can be a turnoff too, because you're like, I don't want to go there, and you get sort of rigid. And so how can we have a supple boundary that allows the flow to happen, but also to feel safe and contained while doing so?
Jennifer, what does creativity mean to you?
Creativity means to me as sort of like a combination of these two elements that I've been talking about, fire and water. There's this transformation and there's this flow that's happening. And it's really beautiful to experience, for me to think about it in terms of the elements, because I just see them everywhere in me as part of my worldview. Thanks to Ayurveda, I see, the air, the fire, and the water as our constant sort of support and network of nutrition. And so when you have the air that sort of stirs the fire, and then the water to help it flow and contain, you get this beautiful, very complete sense of creation. And this is what we're really doing every day of our lives. Creativity does not have to mean your job or making something in a artistic or specific way. We are always creating ourselves. We are always creating reality as we live in a healthful way. And so the more that we can prioritize being balanced in our bodies and in our minds and in our relationships, we're constantly sort of creating life and creating energy and moving energy in a way that can be more supportive and sustainable for all of us who engage in all of these elements, because we're just sort of transferring elements and energy back and forth between us. And so whether you're doing that through something that you make, some sort of writing or creative act that you then share with somebody and it affects them and their bodies and their minds, or in your day-to-day life, these things that we create, how do we create nourishing meals? How do we create nourishing conversations? How do we even sort of create nourishing sort of, nests for ourselves? What are the spaces that we're living in, our homes, our clothing, the objects that we live among? We're constantly sort of creating with all of those things. So creativity is this transformation, this flow, this connection that we can see in really every part of our existence. And when you sort of have that mindset, it can really sort of take some of the pressure off of what it means to be creative, and really open your mind and open your access to what it means to have a creative life in the world. One of my good friends and a wonderful teacher of poetry and writing likes to talk about being a poet in the world, quote unquote, which doesn't mean that you're sort of writing poems all the time, but you can sort of appreciate the poetry of something like a beautiful flower or a tree or some element of nature, the way that a shadow and a light source sort of interact and create a pattern on the wall or on your bed or something like that. All of those are moments to be a poet, to be a creator, and a creative person, just because you're appreciating and seeing something that's beautiful, and that beauty is what nourishes you and inspires you to create more beauty through your own life.
That is a really beautiful answer. Thank you, Jennifer. I have one last question, but before I ask it, I was wondering if you wanted to share any of your poems or writings from your first book.
Oh, my first book, my Beanie Baby poems.
The
Let's see what's
original.
in here.
The
The
original.
OG. I mean, and like I said, this is volume 2. I don't know where
Oh,
volume
sorry.
1 happens to be. So we'll maybe find something. Let's see. Let's see if we can pick a good one.
I just think this is really cute that you have this on hand because they say that whatever you felt a calling towards when you were 7 or less than 7 years old is your purpose in life. So that little,
Really?
yeah, the young version of you knew yourself more than the person who, is kind of going through the world and gaining experiences and knowledge. It's like you have your calling when you come out.
I love that. That's so cute. Okay, let's just go with this one. I remember this particular Beanie Baby. His name was Tuffy, and he was like a little terrier dog, like with the little curly hair. So this is my poem about Tuffy. Tuffy the dog loves to play catch. When you throw him a ball, he's gone in a flash. If it falls in a lake, he does the doggy paddle, but he always retrieves it with a wag of his tail. So there we go.
Oh,
Yeah.
then you pull out Tuffy. You also have Tuffy on hand.
I don't, unfortunately. He's somewhere around here, though.
That's so sweet. All right. So we do have this class coming up on April 28th,
Mhm.
and everyone can sign up already. The page is up. So I was wondering if you could just tell us what people can expect when they come to class on the 28th.
Sure. So we are going to do a deep dive into a lot of the topics that I sort of explained in this wonderful conversation about how we can make a connection between our physical health and our mental health through the apparatus and the practice of writing. We can think of writing sort of as that fire element, that transformative process that can either help move ideas that we want to use for our creative life as writers, but also as other creative people in a sort of specific way if you're working on a specific project, but also in a day-to-day practice and a day-to-day sort of nourishing, self-nourishing level. And so we're going to talk about the connection between writing and our nervous system and how writing can be helpful to bring the nervous system down into a state of rest and digest where you're able to sort of have homeostasis and balance. You're not in a stress response that creates agitation or sort of a blocking of the access to that creative flow. There's more steadiness and there's more access to that sort of prana and the water element that allows ideas to move through us without us getting attached or emotionally sort of stirred and riled by that. At the same time, we're going to use some movement. And so this is going to be a little bit of an interactive workshop, which I'm excited for. So you're definitely going to want to bring your pens and writing paper with you, but also have some space so that we can do a little bit of sort of warm-ups. We think about warm-ups in a movement practice or some sort of athletic activity, but we could also do warm-ups for our mind that are involved with sort of writing on the page, sort of writing warm-ups, but physical warm-ups that help us to feel settled in our bodies so that we can access those elements, that fire element and the water element, that flow in our breath. Many of us live in a space or dwell in a body that is sort of constricted when it comes to access to our breath. And when we don't have access to our breath, we can't be in that relaxed, sort of safe mental state. So we're going to be working a lot with sort of setting the conditions in our bodies, our physical body, to be able to create well. And again, you could sort of use that in a writing practice, but also in your day-to-day life when you're working for your job or sending emails, however you're communicating, how you can support yourself to be able to communicate from a grounded and settled and mindful place. And so within that, we're also going to think more from an Ayurvedic perspective of how writing can be useful for you individually. So based on your dosha, and we'll sort of test out all of the different doshic practices for writing so that you can see what's best for you at this time, because it'll depend on sort of what's going on with you and your particular constitution, how writing can be best supported for you. And we'll also be looking at how to use food and herbs and other sorts of more physical nourishment to help with our brains, with our mental health, with our physical health. So again, sort of like I was describing with my personal story, when you are feeling physically well, you're able to create and produce and sort of tap into these deeper emotional and psychological questions that are the function of our lives and help us feel fulfilled in different ways. How physical nourishment can be useful for that capacity. And in Ayurveda, we have a lot of different techniques and tools to help keep Agni, our digestive fire, going strong in a general way, but then also to support this sort of mental clarity that we want when we're doing a writing practice. So we'll be exploring all of that in conversation, and we'll have a lot of fun prompts to work on together. So again, you should bring your writing practice. You should bring an open mind, a clear mind, maybe have a nice warming, satisfying meal before the class so you feel energized to go. And thinking about what writing means to you. A lot of us, myself included, think about a lot of our activities as like, how can I turn this into a job, or how can I turn this into something that's productive or sort of professional? And that can be a great thing if that is your calling and then that is your what you want to be doing with your writing, but it doesn't have to be. And so having an open mind about what writing can mean to you, it doesn't have to turn into a job. It can be something that is just for you, and then manifest in all of these other ways that we've been talking about. So thinking about sort of flexibility and how this practice can be useful for you right now, rather than putting expectations on it or comparing to others. And we'll talk about how to sort of think about that and support yourself while you're on that inquiry. If you're just sort of figuring things out and beginning this practice, what will it serve for you? How can we sort of set intentions around that?
Yes, you describe in the event description that it's all levels of writing experience, whether it's emails, texts, or professional writers. So I think it's going to be a really great group. I'm very excited for the 28th of April. So everybody, please, I'm going to link the event page in this YouTube video. But thank you, Jennifer, for being with us today. And I'll
Thank
see
you.
you on the 28th.
Wonderful. See everyone there. Bye.
Bye.